A very good evening to you all. It is really a pleasure and a privilege to be here today and to share this platform with a very dear young friend of mine who is a promising historian. When I was listening to the deliberations of the principals of Rishi Bankim Chandra College and Dr. Kanailal Bhattacharya College, I felt that it is a wonderful thing that they have with their deliberations, they have actually set the tune of this webinar, where we shall talk of pluralism. I will be talking of early India. And thank you, Shubhashish, for actually this generous introduction. I mean, I'm really, I don't know what to say. I'm overwhelmed. And now let me go back a little in our conversations with Kakoli, that how did we choose this theme? Kakoli had once called me and she said that we want you to speak in our college. We want to organize an webinar, and it was her idea. She said that I have heard you speak on many themes, but at the end or somewhere you indicate the heterogeneity, you indicate that there was a pluralistic culture in the Indian subcontinent when we look at the sources of early India. And so she said that, can you speak on this idea of pluralism or plurality? I immediately agreed. And though portions of which I'll be talking today, I have published this in some other articles as for a different context. But I thought that we could always gel or bring those things into our idea of pluralism. And thus, this whole webinar, the idea of having pluralism as a theme of the webinar came to the forefront. So I thank Kakoli for thinking this, and also I thank Dr. Bidushi Sarkar for conducting this webinar so well. Now, I will be reading my presentation. Today I don't have any pictures. I have a few maps which I will go as and when required. As you have already seen, that the title of my presentation is Perceiving a Pluralistic Ecumen in Early India, Case Studies from Gujarat, Konkan, and Southeastern Bangladesh. Early India had many voices and could boast of a culture which celebrated pluralism, at least in some parts of the subcontinent. Our sources direct us to a pluralistic ecumen where diverse communities live together in a culture of accommodation. This is not to suggest that there was never any animosity among communities. If we see conflict through one window, there are other windows, in this case mostly inscriptions and texts, that do not suggest unmitigated hostility. What I shall try to argue that, notwithstanding the records of animosities, there were cases, particularly in the coasts, where we find an inhabited world where cosmopolitan milieu survived, betraying a pluralistic society. I'll be talking about the coastal societies from 3 different regions of India. 2 are in the West Coast and 1 in the East Coast. I have drawn upon researches from other scholars, and my own works are also included. Today, my first destination is Gujarat. Why do I begin with Gujarat? One day, as I was sitting in the morning, sipping a cup of tea and thinking about King Ashoka, suddenly it struck me that Ashoka had a governor called Yavanaraja Tushashva in Girinagara, present Girnar, and which is within the Junagadh district, which we learn from Rudradaman's Junagadh inscription. The next question that comes to my mind is, why did he employ a Greco-Iranian as a governor in Girnar? We all know from Ashokan inscriptions that his governors were generally his sons, known as Kumaras, and he had Aryaputra, perhaps the heir apparent for Suvarnagiri, which was a very coveted district. We don't have an answer, but we can always assume that Ashoka's priority was efficiency, and perhaps Tushashva had the qualities that he was looking for. The point is that in Girnar, he could find a Greco-Iranian, or one can argue that he was brought in, I mean Tushashva was brought in from some other places. We have to remember that this was the time when Ashoka was having contacts with the other Mediterranean world, and we know from his inscriptions that he had interactions with the Hellenistic world, like we have the inscriptions talks of Alikasudara and other Ptolemaios and other kings. But it can't be ignored that years after, Rudradaman employed a Pahalava as the governor of Girnar and not a Shaka from his own community. Thus, perhaps, Girnar had a cosmopolitan society which accommodated people like Yavanas, Shakas, and Pahalavas. Moreover, if we look at the location of Girnar, it is not far from the coast. Thus, Girnar accommodated people from different ethnic groups. Gujarat boasted of such important ports that it is quite natural that there will be people from other regions and communities. Though my trust is early medieval period of Indian history as a prelude and also in a way trying to establish the fact that the lineage goes back to much earlier times, I brought in Ashoka and Rudradaman to introduce the theme. My port of call is Somnathapattana, located further north in Kathiawar Peninsula. We are all aware of Somnath, its desiccation, and also the wearable inscription which relates to the construction. I'll take a minute and go to the PowerPoint. I think, 1 second, I have to present now for two. Can you see the map?
It's coming, Didi, not yet, but it's coming.
Okay.
Participants, please close your videos. Please close your videos.
Or else I can show it at the end if it is a problem. The location of Somnath, which it's just I think without wasting time, I go back to my presentation and I'll show the map later on.
Now it's visible.
It's visible? Okay. Then I think you can see.
The map is not yet visible.
No, Jamriti, I think
yeah, it's not the map. Yeah.
লেখাটা চলে আসছে।
Oh, wait 1 second. I have to open the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint is open.
Now it's so. Now
can you see?
Now it's coming. Yes.
It's opening. Now it's coming. Yeah.
লেখাটাও কি আসছে এখনো?
না, লেখাটা আর আসছে না।
Okay.
লেখাটা আর আসছে না। And now the write up has again popped up.
Okay, I'll stop that. Stop sharing that. It will, or it won't. এখন লেখাটা আসছে?
না, এখন কিছু আসছে না।
আচ্ছা, ম্যাপটা?
না, সেটা এখন মানে ওটা বন্ধ হয়ে গেল। দ্যাটস ইট। মানে আপনি ওটা বন্ধ হয়ে গেছে। আবার আপনাকে একটু শেয়ার করতে হবে আমার মনে হচ্ছে। ওটা বন্ধ হয়ে গেছে।
আচ্ছা, 1 second. I will share this. Yes. এখন দেখো, এখন আসবে।
হ্যাঁ, it's coming.
Now it's yeah.
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah. And my text is not visible, I suppose.
No.
Now it's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So my port of call is Somnathapattana, located further north in Kathiawar Peninsula. Yeah, we are all aware of Somnath, its desiccation, and also the wearable inscription, which relates to the construction of a mosque and talks of the friendship between Nakhuda Nuruddin Firuz, mentioned as Noradino Piroja, and Chara, who were referred to as Dharmo Bandhavo. The record is in 2 languages, Sanskrit and Arabic. Ramila Thapar, B.D. Chattopadhyay, and Ranabir Chakraborty have looked at this inscription from different perspectives. What this inscription projects is the society of Somnatha, where a Nakhuda of Islamic faith could request the Panchakulo, which looks after the Shaiva temple, for a piece of land for the construction of a mosque, Mijigiti, which is referred to as Dharmasthana. As B.D. Chattopadhyay mentioned, the wearable record by Alberuni perhaps in a way contradicts the idea of indigenous insularity alleged by Alberuni more than 2 centuries earlier. Therefore, this the whole idea that a Nakhuda, owner of a ship, is requesting the Panchakula, who looks after the Shaiva temple of Tripurantaka, the famous Shaiva temple of Somnath, for a piece of land, and the Panchakula gladly assigns the piece of land, and then the mosque is, the Mijigiti is built. The whole thing is very interesting and talks of the idea of the culture of accommodation at Somnath, even though we had this whole history of the desiccation of Somnath. In Gujarat itself, we can refer to another inland trade center, Anahilapura, known as Naharwara in Arabic sources and Geniza records, where we have presence of Jewish and Arab traders. What is important is that the rulers' attitudes towards these merchants were very positive. In fact, Al-Idrisi highly praises the welcoming attitude of the rulers towards the Muslim merchants arriving from the Arab world. In his opinion, I quote him, "Town of Naharwara is frequented by large number of Musalman traders and who go there on business. They are honorably received by the king and his ministers and find protection and safety." This is corroborated, unquote. This is corroborated in the Lekha Paddhati, which says that the foreign merchants and caravan traders are to be received well and honorably. Mana Pura Sara. Small presents and large shares should be obtained in accordance with earlier custom. Improper behavior to the foreign merchants was condemned. This attitude towards foreign merchants indicates the interest of the state in trading activities. Ibn Hawkal informs that along with the coastal towns of Sindan, Saimur and Kanbaya, the Muslim precepts were openly observed in Famhal. Famhal was the name of Anahilavada. Anahilavada had 3 different names. It was Naharwara and Famhal, and of course, it is the present-day Patan. We know of the beautiful Bapi, that the stepwell of Bauli, the stepwell in Patan. I have actually talked about Anahilapura as an urban center where we can see convergence in a separate essay. But while I was reading this, I felt that this idea of convergence comes from actually the thought of heterogeneity and accommodation. And I thought that I could bring in this presentation today. With this, we now move on to the port of Sanjan in North Konkan. I will again. One second. Yeah, of special interest is the cosmopolitan character of this port. Hardly do we come across a port with the presence of 4 communities, Arabs, Parsis, Jews, and locals at any given time, indicating the convergence of diverse faiths, Islam, Zoroastrianism, followers of Vaishnavism, and goddess cults. The local and the global perfectly blended here. The epigraphic records of the Rashtrakutas and the Shilaharas, the Arab geographers and merchants' accounts, and the excavated remains from Sanjan could be profitably used to fathom the convergence of people and faith in this port town. Of the various dynastic rulers of around the 8th-9th century CE, the Arabs praised the Rashtrakutas, considering them friends. The reason behind this friendship was that the Rashtrakutas provided them with all facilities of trade and commerce in the kingdom. A few examples reflecting this bond may be cited. We can begin with Suleiman al-Tajir, who in 851 CE, in his Akbar al-Sin wal Hind, recorded that Balhara was the noblest among the Indians, and the kingdom of Balhara began from the seashore, which country is called Kamkam. Kamkam, Konkan, this is the name of the Konkan coast. According to him, the inhabitants of the Balhara's country say that if their kings reign and live for a long time, it is solely in consequence of the favor shown to the Arabs. In fact, among all the kings, there is no one to be found who is as partial to the Arabs as the Balharas, and his subjects follows his example. Balhara is identified with the Rashtrakutas being derived from Balharaya, the Prakrit form of Vallabha Raja, the title of the Rashtrakuta rulers. Ibn Khudadbi mentioned in 920 CE that the greatest king of India was Balhara, who resided in Al-Kamkam, the land of teak wood. Since Arab merchants were associated with the coast, they normally hailed the Rashtrakutas as monarch of the Konkan coast, though the Rashtrakutas also occupied significant territory further inland in the Deccan. Finally, we have Al-Masudi's work of 915 CE, which speaks eloquently of the ports of the Konkan. Unlike many others, he personally visited the Konkan coast during the rule of the Rashtrakuta king Indra III. He writes, I quote him, "Of all the kings of Sindh and India, no one pays greater respect to the Muslims than Balhara. In this kingdom, Islam is honored and protected," unquote. He mentioned the 10,000 Bayasira Muslims at Saimur, that is Chol, along with merchants from Siraf, Uman, Basra, and Baghdad. Bayasiras may be people from southern Arabia who were excluded from membership in the Arab tribal group. They married locally, indicating the flexible aspect of coastal communities. Considering the proximity and linkages between the port towns of North Konkan, it is possible that these merchants also visited Sanjan in their mercantile capacity. The tie between the Arabs and the Rashtrakutas manifested itself in epigraphic records of the period, such as copper plates from Chinchani, a small coastal settlement 30 kilometers south of Sanjan. If you look at the map, you will see the location of Chinchani, which is just up Sanjan. The first copper plate belonged to Rashtrakuta Indra III. It is said that during Indra III's reign, there was a ruler named Madhumati Sugatipa who belonged to the Tajika community. The word Tajika, B.D. Chattopadhyay has explained in his Representing the Others. It is derived from the Arabic tribe or tribal confederation of the Tayi. Madhumati is the Sanskritized version of Muhammad, and his father was Sahiyarahara, a Sanskritized version of the Persian name Shahriyar. We are told that he had been appointed after he conquered all the kings of the harbors. Vijitya Kara Dandena Sarva Velakuladhipan. Velakul is the coast, the harbor. On behalf of his overlord and placed his own officials in them. Control of Velakula indicates that he was in command of the coast. Another copper plate from Chinchani of the time of Krishna III references persons bowing at the feet of the Rashtrakuta monarch. Among them, we find Parashikas and Tajikas. Tajikas we have already mentioned, were a tribe from the Arab world. And the Parashikas must have been Parsis, living in Sanjan. The presence of Arabs in Sanjan is amply corroborated by Arab geographers and traveler accounts of Sindan, as we have shown. The Moroccan traveler Al-Idrisi, in the delight of those who seek to wander through the regions of the world of the mid-12th century, talked of Sindan, along with other ports in the west coast, noting that all these countries were inhabited by people of different religions, customs, and manners, which is, of course, an evidence of the pluralistic nature of Sanjan as a port town. Most of these places were under the Rashtrakutas, and even Khudadbi wrote in the mid of the 9th century that the Rashtrakuta monarch, as I mentioned earlier, was a great friend of the Arabs and allowed the construction of mosques in the coastal enclaves of the Muslims. Elizabeth Lambourne gives a succinct account of Ibn Hawqal's text, highlighting Muslim mercantile groups settled or sojourning over Rashtrakuta territory. This amply supports the information from inscriptions of an Arab governor ruling over the region in the 10th century. As suggested by Lambourne, it is apparent that West Asian merchants were marrying locally in this environment, leading to the emergence of a new group of Muslims. After the Rashtrakutas, the Silaharas of Togoropuro were in charge of, Togoropuro is modern Ter, were in charge of Sanjan, and we find Arabs still acting as administrative functionaries. The Chinchani plate of the reign of Chittaraja, datable to 1034 CE, refers to the reign of the feudatory Chamunda Raja who ruled over the Samyana Pattana. The purpose of the inscription was to record the grant of an oil mill, Ghanaka, in favor of Kautaka Matika of the goddess Bhagavati at Samyana. Among the persons addressed by Chamunda Raja in connection with this gift included the merchants Alia, Mahara, and Madhumata. So Alia is Ali, Mahara is Meher, and Madhumata is Muhammad. These are the sanitized versions. Definitely these are Arabs, indicating that West Asian ties were still dominant at the port. Many notable groups of people were present at the time of the grant, among whom a particular group called the Hamyamanas is significant. There is a quite lot of confusion regarding the identification of the Hamyamanas. Earlier scholars like Mirashi wanted to identify them with the Parsis, but we know that Parsis were known as Parasikas, so they cannot be Hamyamanas. Then there was this attempt to identify them with the Panchavanna, with the Tamil Anju Panchalattara, but that was also not accepted. And finally, Y. Subbarayulu, who felt that the term represented a trading body composed of West Asian seafaring merchants, including Arabs, Jews, Christians, Parsis, etc. In support of his argument, he compares several inscriptions from Java of the 9th early centuries, 10th centuries, which reference Hunjaman, Hunjaman, and Hinjaman, of which Hunjaman could be a variant of Hanjamana. Ranabir Chakravarti, on the other hand, tends to identify the Hamyamana or the Anjuvannam with the Jewish India traders known from the Geniza letters and Kerala inscriptions. Though Sanjan was no more under the Arab governors, the Arab mercantile community continued to make their presence felt. This indicates a close and continuing interaction between political power, trade, and the acceptance of foreign merchants by locals. Here we are reminded of the anonymous writer of Hudud al-Alam, who wrote in the middle of the 10th century, and he informed us that at Sindan lived Muslims and Hinduvan. He says, in that locality is a Friday mosque and an idol temple. One can imagine the cosmopolitan ambience of Samyana Pattana. This could be the result of a tolerant and liberal milieu that we can only imagine in a port town. A distinct community of the Gujarati coastal world was the Parsi community. Their original settlement was at Sanjan, perhaps because the Chalukyas of the Deccan conducted diplomatic relations with the Parsian Sassanid kingdom. Zoroastrian communities from Persia settled at Sanjan as per oral traditions in the Kisse Sanjan, a quasi-historical Parsi poem of the original community which fled Islamic persecution in Iran in the 7th, 8th century CE. The Kisse, based on oral tradition, was written down in 1600 and must therefore be used with due caution and appropriate allowances as a historical source, given the way it was composed and transmitted. But we are lucky that we have archaeological evidence to support Kissa's, some of the events that Kissa mentions. Next slide. So this photograph actually shows how the Zoroastrians wanted to convince their Indian king. His name was Jadirana, and they came here for requesting asylum. And if we read Kissa Sanjanka, we find that they were coming from West Asia, and they first came to Diu. But from Diu, they moved into Sanjan and settled there. And there are in Sanjan, if we go there, it's a sleepy little village, but there are the Persian firewalters, the Parsis, there are the Dokmas. So you have all the materials that one can see in actually Sanjan. Now, I'm not going to the details of the Kissa. That will take much time. The story of the original settlement in the Kissa Sanjan is supported by, as I mentioned, materials excavated from Sanjan. These reveal traditions resulting from interactions with the local population. Excavations were conducted on a mount with a circular depression at its top. According to local tradition, this was a dokma or tower of silence and is datable to the 11th century. It was well preserved and confirmed the importance of the port as a center of Parsi settlement while revealing information on Parsi mortuary practices. Excavations within the dokma yielded a large number of glass bangles, bangle fragments, rings of silver, copper and mixed metal and glass beads. Parsi women commonly wore and continue to wear glass bangles as a symbol of their married status. A very large number of glass artifacts have been recovered from excavations, and predominant among them are glass vessels, which were typical of the glass manufacturers in Persia in the 9th-10th centuries. The presence of Parsis at Sanjan is an archaeologically proven fact, fitting the hypothesis that the Parsis settled on the west coast of India and set up an elaborate trade network between the Persian Gulf region and India. One cannot ignore the Jewish mercantile group among the foreign mercantile communities in Sanjan. They are vividly present through their letters written in the late 11th, 12th centuries, which provide insight into commercial transactions on the western seaboard. That Jewish merchants were present in Sanjan in the last decades of the 10th century until the 11th century is evident from the letters referencing Sindani indigo. The Geniza documents reference an 11th century Jewish merchant, Ibn Okal, who maintained meticulous details of his dealings in Sanjani indigo through correspondence with his agents. Ranabir Chakraborty's detailed study reveals that indigo was produced in Western India and shipped from the port of Sanjan in the North Konkan. Indigo, in fact, was a product of Gujarat, and an early inscription from Gujarat, the Charter of Vishnu Sena, references indigo vats. Actually, the inscription talks about Neela Dhumpaka. So therefore, that indigo, the color was there and the clothes was to be dyed in indigo. And just to tell you that how indigo was so important, even as early during the time of the periplus of the Erythraean Sea in the middle of the 1st century, we have the port of Berenike. And in Berenike, archaeologists have found the materials, cloths, very harsh, not very fine cloths, harsh, where you have prints with indigo. So Barugaza, which was very important, a port of Gujarat, very important at that point of time, was probably exporting these cloths with indigo prints. And therefore, as it is visible now from the inscriptions that Gujarat was a place where we have indigo as a product, we can actually link the presence of these cloths with indigo prints in Berenike. Thus, Sindani indigo, figuring in the Ibn Okal correspondence, was Gujarati indigo, and the port of Sindan had yet another extensive hinterland in that trade. The Arab merchants' accounts and the Jewish merchant letters are sources which reflect mobility and circulation across the Indian Ocean. Even the inscriptions indicate mobility. Thus, Bhilla Mala Deva traveled to Bhilmal to Sanjan. Let me explain a little bit. In Sanjan, we have this matha or a temple of this deity called Bhillamala Deva. Now, Bhinmal is in Rajasthan. So from Bhinmal, the merchants, and there is a mercantile group who are known as Shrimalas, from which we have the surname Shrimali. So the Shrimalas from Bhinmal, they moved through Gujarat to the Konkan coast, settled in Sanjan, and then established a temple, a deity who was called by their own territory, own country, and own region. And it was known as Bhillo Maladeva. He was a form of Vishnu. So therefore, there was movements and mobility between different areas. Sanjan as a port town was a cosmopolitan site which experienced intermingling of diverse communities who professed different religion. This remarkable multiplicity of religious practices at a port speaks of A, the vibrant cultural and social life in a port town, and B, the brisk trade at Sanjan, which was facilitated by the accommodation of cultural and social pluralism. The host society was conducive for the development of diasporic features. From Sanjan, I will move further south, and I'll just finish the Konkan coast with one example from the Goa region. It is from the Kadambas of Goa, and I'll talk about an inscription and how the Muslim merchants and then later on the administration became very important even at Goa. When Guhalla Deva, the Kadamba ruler, made his way to Goa, he found that a native of the city named Madhummad or Muhammad Madhummati of Tilji, that is the Tajikas origin, the wealthiest among all seafaring traders, a person of great wisdom, rendered a great and public service to the above-mentioned king Guhalla Deva. The city of Goa, which was made the capital of his kingdom by Kadamba Jayakeshi I, that is, he ruled around 1050 to 1080, owed a substantial part of his prosperity to the wise administration of Sandano, a grandson of the merchant Muhammada, who had rendered valuable service to Guhalla Deva. Jayakeshi appointed him governor of the Konkan, prudent, just, and liberal. He was well versed in mathematics and many other different subjects. In 1053, Sandano established in the capital a charitable institution which arranged food for the poor and the helpless and lodgings for the pilgrims. The resources for running the institution came from trading vessels and the merchants from foreign countries. This is another evidence of accepting a foreigner into the administration. And there is this Panjim plates of Jayakeshi I, which talks about one Aliyama. Aliyama is from Ali, the peaceful, who was born in the city, and he was a Tayyad of a Tajika, that Tayyad descent, and his son was this Madhumata, whom I mentioned, and then his Madhumata son was Sandana. So this presence of Sandana as a very important person is reflected not only in one inscription, but in many inscriptions from Goa, to the Kadamba rulers of Goa. And it is said that his munificence removed the misery of the distressed, and his strength put an end to his enemies. The good conduct of that wise man attracted the minds of the honest persons. So therefore, these inscriptions actually show that how the rulers also respected the merchants who were brought into administration, who were of Islamic faith, who were Arabs, belonging to one of the tribes of the Arabs, and the goodness of these persons were recognized and mentioned in the inscription. To that extent that it was inscribed so that it is there for perpetuity. Now we are approaching our final port of call, known as Samandar, located in Chittagong. A few words about the presence of Buddhism in Chittagong would be in order. Second. This map actually I should have shown earlier. You can see where Goa is located. You all know that. And then comes this map of Harikela. So I will be talking about Harikela, and I'll be talking about Vikramapura later on.
Shuchandradi, could you, sorry to interrupt you, could you
Yeah.
please put your slide on view slide mode so that we can see the whole slide?
Okay. So it means on, yeah, I'll do that. Slideshow mode, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
But the problem is, if I put it in the view slideshow mode, what I'll do is can you see now?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Otherwise, you know,
no, please carry on. Please carry on. Please carry on. Sorry.
Now, this is the last section of my presentation, which I was talking about the presence of Buddhism in Chittagong, which I should mention before I come to Islam. Known as Harikela in early medieval times, the region in and around Chittagong could boast of many Buddhist viharas from known from epigraphic records, Tibetan texts, and art historical materials. In fact, a hoard of miniature bronze Buddha images, 66 in number, datable to 9th to 10th century CE, along with bronze ritual objects, were discovered in a place called Jewari. Presently, they call it Jiuri, near Chittagong in 1927. And then there are represent different Buddhas in different mudras. Then you have variety of representation, not only of Buddha, but of the Bodhisattvas like Maitreya, Avalokiteshvara, Vajraswata, beautiful representations of Padmapani, Manjusri. So you have a whole gamut of small miniature images that were found from this region. And contiguous to Chittagong, it is located the famous Buddhist monastic site called Mainamati, where a cluster of monasteries still looms large. Even the rulers of Harikela professed Buddhism. In this milieu of strong Buddhist presence, Islam gradually made its inroad. Interestingly, while Chittagong was flourishing as a Buddhist center in around 9th-10th century CE, Arab geographers and merchants began to throng the port of Samandar in Chittagong. I should mention here that till 8th century, the port of call, the major port of call was Tamralipto, which was located in present-day West Bengal. But after 8th century, we do not have any inscriptions or any texts which mention the port of Tamralipto. And then we find the rise of Samandar in Chittagong region. So whatever, if the people of Bengal, as you all know, there was nothing called Bengal at that point of time. It was a conglomeration of different subregions. And I'm talking about Horikelo, which was a subregion. Mainamati was in the subregion of Shamotato. And I'll be also talking about Banga, which was another subregion. But the point is that we have reference to Samandar from 850. We have reference to Harkand, that is the Sea of Harikela, from 851 CE. So it appears that while there was this decline of the port of Tamralipto, there was the rise of this port of Samandar, which finally became the grand port of the Portuguese, the Chittagong port. So when we learn about Srivijay's, the king of Srivijaya, having some relationship with the Pala rulers, we have to realize that all kinds of interaction happened through the port of Samandar. There were no other ports at that point of time within the subregions of Bengal. Precisely therefore, Islam, so we have Arab geographers and merchants began to throng the port of Samandar in Chittagong. Precisely therefore, Harikela looms large in Arabic and Persian travel accounts from the mid-9th century, being designated as Bahar-e-Harkand in the Silsilat al-Tawarik by Suleiman Tajir in 851, the earliest known source referencing the Bay of Bengal as Bahar-e-Harkand. Harkand was obviously derived from Horikelo. Again, the Bay of Bengal was also clearly defined as Bahar Harkal, or the Sea of Horikelo, by the anonymous author of the Hudud al-Alam. I have to mention here that my interest in Horikelo was largely due to the fantastic discovery of my mentor, Professor B.N. Mukherjee, when he could read Horikelo on the coins. And we were students at that point of time. And from then, we actually exchanged many, he used to talk a lot about Horikelo, and then I took up my research on this region. So I owe this to my mentor. The Moroccan traveler Al-Idrisi, in the delight of those who seek to wander through the regions of the world of the mid-12th century, writes, Samandar is a large town, commercial and rich, and where there are goods profits to be made. It stands upon a river which comes from the country of Kashmir, which is, of course, we know that it's not valid. Rice and various grains, especially excellent wheat, are to be obtained here. Aloe is brought here from the country of Kamarupa, 15 days distance by river, which the waters are sweet. 1 day's sail from this city, there's a large island where people and frequently by merchants of all countries. This was probably the Sandip Island which was being mentioned. And the interaction sphere of Samandar was large. So it was like it had lot of areas through which Samandar could interact. So it had a very strong hinterland, and it had a very rich foreland. For the port to grow, it is a desideratum that we have a very good hinterland and a foreland. Again, Ibn Khudadbeh in the late 9th century also wrote about Samandar. The descriptions point to the fact that Samandar was a premier port of southeastern Bengal at this time. Thus, it can be surmised that by the 9th century CE, both the sea and its port attracted the attention of Arabic and Persian writers and became a part and parcel of the Arab geographical world. That a sea was named after a particular unit, Hurricane, speaks for the region's importance and also its popularity among the seafarers of the time. This was the moment when the people of Chittagong, then Hurricane, encountered a group of people practicing a new religion called Islam. Being a port, it was open to people from different regions. Arab sailors in particular who professed Islam and were very active here from 10th century CE. Their evidence suggests that the Arab traders had arrived along the Bengal coast long before the Turkish conquest. The Arab writers also knew about the kingdoms of Kamrup and Rumi, the latter being identified with the kingdom of the Pala ruler Dharmapala. Ibn Khudadbeh refers to the Arab, Yemeni, and Abyssinian merchants' presence in Samandar. Al-Idrisi is another geographer who talks about the importance of Samandar in the mercantile networks of Arab merchants. I'm not talking of Ibn Battuta here, but Ibn Battuta had very rich stories regarding the presence of regarding Samandar and its relation to Southeast Asia. Sometimes the Sufi saints also accompanied the merchants in their ship. D.C. Shen, Dinesh Chandra Shen, mentions the transport of Arabian dervishes and peers on board Chittagong vessels, evoking significant shipbuilding activity and amid bustling trade before the Portuguese arrival. As a result, small settlements of Muslims grew up in and around Chattogram even before actual political control by Muslim rulers. The port of Samandar, later on Chittagong port, was also used as a transit trade zone for connections between countries across the Bay of Bengal. In the literature of the ballads, there are a good many references to country boats and ships on board, of which the enterprising people of the district of Chittagong make sea voyages for trading purposes. There's an admixture of Arabic words, idioms, and phrases in the local dialects of the Chittagong and Noakhali districts, the result of the close contacts between the Arabs and the local population through the ages. That the Arab merchants settled here and found a new home is evident from the fact that the genealogical tables of some Muslim families of Chittagong, said to be the descendants of Arab immigrants, furnish another valuable evidence of the coming of the Arabs as settlers in Chittagong. From the genealogical table contained in the Muqtul Hussain by a local poet named Muhammad Khan, we come to know that Mahi Sawar, his forefather, was born in the Siddiqui family of Arabia. It is stated that he came to Chittagong by sea, riding on the back of a fish. Like Muhammad Khan, Abdul Nabi, another local poet, proudly claims himself as a descendant of the Siddiqui family. Muhammad Chuhar, a local poet, informs us that Munshi Zafar, his patron, belonged to the holy lineage of Khalifa Abu Bakr Siddiqui. Instances of similar cases may be cited in large numbers from medieval Puthis. Thus, Islam penetrated into Hurricane through the agency of the Arab merchants. The mercantile network was responsible in introducing Islam as a religion in a practically Buddhist terrain. We have to remember that though Brahminical religion was present, it was Buddhism that was the predominant religion and the rulers were Buddhists. When the Sufi saints reached Hurricane, one of their vocations was spreading their thoughts and beliefs among the common people. The commonality in practice between what the saints were preaching and some of the Buddhist teachings often blurred the boundaries between the two religious strands. Whether there was any kind of competitiveness between the two cannot be stated at the present state of knowledge. But one can observe that though through the adoption of certain Buddhist practices, the Sufis perhaps intended to reach the Buddhist population. I have taken the information about the genealogy from S.B. Kanungur's book, A History of Chittagong. Sufism also received the patronage of Arab merchants settled in Chittagong. However, Buddhism was not totally obliterated, and thus till date it is a living religion in Chittagong, which abounds in Buddhist monasteries. In the contemporary scenario, the Buddhist population of southeastern Bengal is divided into separate groups like the Buddhist of the plains, the Chittagong hill tribes, the Arakan Buddhists. So when we look at the inscriptions issued by the Buddhist rulers of Chittagong, they don't mention the people of Islamic faith. But at the same time, the contemporary Arab accounts mention the presence of the merchants or the in Chittagong. So it can be surmised that it was not through the political power, but through these merchants that the first encounter of the people of Chittagong to Islam was through these merchants. I would like to end this discussion with a recently published Sanskrit inscription from Bengal by Ryosuke Furui and commented upon by Ranabir Chakraborty, which has an implicit link with Samandar. This inscription is Sanskrit, is dedicated to Allah and found from Shujapur in the Vanga region. The inscription talks of a vihara protected by the divinity Allah Bhattaraka Swami. The inscription is dated to the time of Sri Bhojavarman, 1137 to 1145, a king of the Varman dynasty who ruled in Vanga. This is the earliest reference to a shrine associated with Islam in Bengal, showing, as argued earlier, that the Muslims came in the region earlier to Turkish conquest. This was probably a mosque. The donor's name is Abu Deva, perhaps from Abu, a common name among the Muslims, and he was a Mahashamanta, which shows that he was an important personality in the administrative setup of Sri Bhojavarman. Thus, as in Sunjan, he was the part of the administration, as I mentioned. His father was Hasi, perhaps derived from Hashim, and he was a merchant. Thus, there was a Muslim diaspora in ancient Vanga, which was accommodated by host society, which had both Brahmanical and Buddhist presence. And to talk of Brahmanical, Bhojavarman himself was a Vaishnava, but he patronized Buddhism, and during his time, manuscripts were written, Buddhist manuscripts were written. Now, this actually shows that these the father of Abu Deva, Hashim, who was a merchant, must have come to Vanga region. And if you look at the map, you will see that Horikela, Shamototo, Vanga, these are on the same route, and one can easily traverse to these places. So perhaps we can assume that this merchant Hashim had come to Samandar as a merchant and then moved further north to Vanga, and so there was a settlement. And then, of course, his son continued, and his son rose to the position of a Mahashamanta and in the administrative hierarchy. So this is a very interesting example of also of social mobility that we find from this particular inscription. So the advent of Muslims here, as shown in the case of Chittagong, was not through conquest, but through commerce. Cultural plurality was a lived experience in Vanga, Shamototo, and Horikela. And thus, we have images of pluralistic past of Bengal, which cannot be denied. Finally, the sources that I drew upon today suggest that there were few attempts at othering any diasporic groups. I'm always talking about that, the kind of the note with which this webinar started, that how there is an attempt at homogeneity, attempt at showing an homogeneous past, and also there is a very strong attempt at othering of other groups. So this inscriptions show that there were few attempts at othering any diasporic groups, including Muslims, by local host societies in the subcontinent. The trend of convergence, when one looks at possible patterns of interaction between the different elements, may be seen to be manifest itself more clearly when a religious center with a local or regional base emerges as a center of common focus. The coastal town of Somnath and Sanjan thus offer emblematic illustration of cultural plurality. Thank you very much.